Can you say your name and birthday, please?
My name? I was Raymond Bleiweis. I was born in 1924, March 25th, 1924. So I'll be 90 years old this March. 90.
And what war did you serve in?
What's that?
What war did you serve in?
World War II,
And what branch of service?
in the Corps of Engineers. I came out of first lieutenant. I was a private when I went in. I went in at 18 years old. I enlisted. The war was, or the reason for everything was a little different than what we have in the United States now. We had Pearl Harbor, which I'm sure you know about. We had Pearl Harbor in December 1941. We then had Hitler doing his deed in Germany mostly on the Jewish people. And I felt, even though I was in the college at the time, I felt I should enlist. And surprisingly, when I think back about it, my mother and father never objected to my enlisting. And I enlisted when I was 18. That's okay. I then went from being in the Army at 18, the basic training at Fort McClellan, Alabama. I was a private. And then after that, I went to Clemson for a short period. They had a program for guys like myself called ASTP, Army Special Training Program. And I was there at Clemson for less than 6 months. And then I went from there to Camp Claiborne in Louisiana. And Camp Claiborne is the only place in the world, I understand, you can stand knee deep in mud and have sand blow in your face. Pretty dismal place. At any rate, they asked me to design, since I was supposedly an engineer, they designed a plan for having the rainwater run out of the bayous in Louisiana. By the way, interesting, the bayous were something. I'm sure you heard the story about bayous. At any rate, I signed up for officer candidate school while I was in Claiborne, Camp Claiborne. And lo and behold, they picked me. And on the way to officer candidate school in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, is when we had the invasion of Europe, Omaha Beach. I was on a train going to Fort Belvoir, going through Louisiana, and sure enough, the invasion was taking place. I spent 3 months plus at Fort Belvoir, and I met the man who kind of shaped my life. My TAC officer was somebody named Jack Emberton, and we nicknamed him for Jake the Snake. But he was a man among men, and he was quite a guy. By the way, he's no longer alive, but he is. At any rate, he saw me through officer candidate school, and I graduated for, as I say, 3 months plus, and they made me a second lieutenant. And lo and behold, after being a second lieutenant, they told me to get ready to go overseas. And I went first from Fort Lewis in Washington through a train ride to Camp Shanks in New York, and they sent me over to Europe. And I landed in Le Havre, and lo and behold, they put me in a convoy. My company was convoying from Le Havre, France to Antwerp, Belgium. Antwerp, Belgium was being bombed by the Germans at that time with V1s and V2s. Has anybody been to Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C.? There's the V1s and V2s are on display in Smithsonian Institute. And that's what Germans were bombing Antwerp and London. And Antwerp, of course, was a major port for bringing goods in from into Europe. And the Germans at this point, when I was there, was about 75 miles from Antwerp. It was a little scary at one point. And I had I carried a sidearm, I carried a rifle, a carbine, and believe it or not, that's pretty much where the war, I could say, ended, but it wasn't quite that. On Christmas Day, 1944, and you could probably look it up in the history, the skies opened up for the first time in a few weeks, and the American and British planes flying overhead bombed the German positions outside of Antwerp. And then General Patton came up from the south and wiped out the rest of the German position. By the way, I was not at Bastogne, the Battle of the Bulge. I was in the Battle of Antwerp. The Bulge was up the road a piece. I'm sure you all heard about the Battle of the Bulge. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Battle of the Bulge was in Bastogne, France, which was up the road from where I was in Antwerp. And then after the Patton took care of the German positions and wiped them out, there was a race to Berlin, which I was not in part of, a race by the Russians and the Americans to Berlin. And the Russians got there first and separated Berlin. They called that East Berlin at the time. And have you been to Germany? No? East Berlin was quite dismal at the time. And I was there, I remember how many years ago, many, and Germany was split quite a bit. At any rate, the position that the Americans took was that the war was over, and it was over. I celebrated VE Day in Antwerp, Belgium, and after a while, not very long, the captain told me that I was going. They were going to convoy down to Marseille, France, and get on a boat going to the Philippine Islands. And we put all our vehicles, etc., on a boat. It was called the William E. Byrd. It was a Liberty ship through the Panama Canal, and I was on there. I was the cargo security officer in the Panama Canal, going through the Panama Canal. And after going through the Panama Canal and going through the Panama Canal on the Liberty ship, one day the skipper who was on watch at the time, skipper on the William E. Byrd, yelled out, periscope off the starboard bow. And you know something, all these years I haven't forgotten that. Really scared us all. We didn't know whether it was our periscope or the Japanese periscope. At any rate, we ran back toward San Francisco as fast as the Liberty ship would go. And after about a day of running, the skipper said, "Let's go." And he turned around, going back out to the Philippine Islands. And sure enough, nothing happened to us. We had our over-the-side bags ready, but we never got torpedoed. By the way, interesting, the guys who were on the boat, a couple of them had been, of the crew of the William E. Byrd, had been torpedoed in a different boat. At any rate, we landed in Batangas in the Philippine Islands, and the time we landed was right after Harry Truman ordered the bombing, the first A-bomb of Hiroshima. And they said to the Japanese, surrender, and they did not. And then, about 3 days later, I think it was, they bombed Nagasaki with an A-bomb. Is that right? Anybody remember that? Anybody remember the history at all? Anyway, they bombed Nagasaki, and the Germans then, not Germans, the Japanese then surrendered. And lo and behold, they surrendered in the Philippine Islands, all over, all the islands, because the A-bomb was there. And lo and behold, they surrendered in the Philippine Islands in a place called Pagabag. As I say, it was in the middle of, it was north of Manila, but it was in the middle of the island being Luzon. And when they surrendered like right here. I was there and the surrender took place right in front of me in my platoon's jurisdiction. They had Japanese officers came out of the hills and surrendered their arms, their swords, and that was it. Some Japanese did not want to surrender and were living in the hills in the Philippines. And what the MPs and military police did was they dropped a bomb into the holes where they thought the Japanese were, telling them to surrender, and if they did, they threw a bomb in. And that ended it. But the prisoner of war camp that we built, the Americans built, was in a town called Solano, which I can't find on the map either. And the Solano prisoner of war camp was like a country club compared to what the Japanese had for us at the American POW camp, was a place called Cabanatuan, which is on the map and is a thriving city today, I understand. Cabanatuan. At any rate, Cabanatuan was where the Americans had been holed up in the prison, and it was not a nice place. They then made me, after hauling out about 9,000 Japanese out of here and surrendering to the Americans up in the Parry, which is the northern part of northern Luzon, and the MPs did what they had to do. They licensed or recorded all the Japanese soldiers who had surrendered and put them on a vehicle, my vehicle, one of my vehicles, and we drove from Apari down to Solano and put them on the prisoner of war. We kept the road open for about, I'm going to say 4 or 5 months, hauling the Japanese out, which I was in charge of hauling them out. And after a while, we thought we had them all, and there was about 9,000 Japanese we hauled out. And we said that my captain told me he was going to move me. And he moved me to a little town called, of all things, San Fernando. San Fernando was a port on the east side, I'm sorry, on the west side of Luzon, and I was supposed to keep the piers open. There were 6 piers at the time, and the American troops in the Philippines was bringing goods in through Australia, and the Australian skippers didn't care much about keeping it open, but it was our job to repair the dock, and that's what we did. We repaired the docks in San Fernando, and I became the port and dock engineer. They then gave me a first lieutenancy, and that's where you see the pictures of me. First lieutenant for whatever time it was, and then they, after a while, my points came up, and my points were as a result of medals, time overseas, etc. And they told me I had enough points to go home. And there I was, 44 months in the service. I came out of first lieutenant, and they put me on a boat going to San Francisco, going home. I can't remember the name of the boat. I know it was on a boat though. And I got on a train from San Francisco to Fort Dix in New Jersey, where I went into the service. And Fort Dix, they said, "Okay, Raymond, you're through." And I was through. And that was in April, I believe it was April of 46, it was either 46 or 47. And I then got on a train from Fort Dix to Penn Station in New York. And and I got off the train and I walked to my mother and father's store that they had on 7th Avenue. And they said, "Hi, Mom, I'm here." And they, of course, they didn't know I was coming. They didn't know what was happening. The method of communication at that time was not easy. And there I was. And a short while after that, I worked as a furrier. I was a furrier for a while. By the way, interesting sideline. On the boats going over to Europe, there was 21 officers in a cabin, and we started out the first day playing poker. I didn't know how to play poker. And I was with the game, and I made a lot of money. Don't ask me how I did that. I drew inside straights and all that. The thing that you don't usually do. And I made $4,000 playing poker. And I sent the money home. That wasn't easy, by the way. I had a money belt, and we used to somehow send the money home. And my mother and father, who was broke at the time, and they never touched the $4,000. They gave me the money. They made sure I knew it when I got out of the army that the $4,000 was available. And I used it later on in life on an investment. At any rate, that's the story of my short army career of 44 months. I had V Day in Antwerp, Belgium, and VJ Day in northern Luzon. And I'm living a long time just remembering all these things. I made a little notes here. Are there any questions then?
Okay.
We have a few questions.
So we have a list of questions. You might have already answered some of them, but we just need to have us to ask the questions.
Yeah, ask questions.
Okay. So, where were you born?
The Bronx, New York.
Can you tell us about your family and what your parents did and how many siblings you have?
And how many, what that had?
How many brothers and sisters do you have?
I'm sorry, I don't hear that.
Siblings.
Siblings.
How many siblings do you have?
How many siblings do you have?
I'm sorry, I mean what?
How many brothers and sisters?
There's one man who had the same mother and father I had, but he wasn't my brother. He was just an evil person. Yeah.
Okay.
And I unfortunately went into business with him. And without going into that detail, he just was a bad guy. He's still alive, by the way, I think. I haven't seen him in years.
Okay.
The last time I saw him was when my mother died. His mother died too. And I haven't seen him since. It's been what, 5-6 years, Mark? At least.
20 years.
How many?
20.
Oh my. Long time. But my brother was, without going into the details, he was a card-carrying communist. Just a bad guy. Bad guy.
Okay.
What did your parents do for a living?
My friends,
Your parents.
my parents, they're in the fur business with a store on 7th Avenue and did not do well. In fact, when I got out of the Army, they were really broke. I think I took a look, there was $25.67 in their bank account. Maybe 68 cents. Not much. And I went into the fur business for a short while because my father talked me into it. And through the GI Bill then, I became a designer of fur coats. I did fairly well with it. Okay?
What did you do before you entered the service?
I went to CCNY in New York called City College of New York. I took mechanical engineering. I had 2 years of college when I enlisted in the Army. I was 18 at the time. I went from 16 years old to 18, and then I enlisted.
Do you have any other family members who served in the military?
No.
Okay. And how did you enlist?
What?
How did you enlist?
I went to a place up in Fort Dix, New Jersey, and signed in, and they took me right away.
Why did you decide to enlist?
Oh, that's a good question. There was a time when, you gotta think about this a little bit. There was a time that Pearl Harbor was still alive, still very much in everybody's mind. And then, of course, I'm Jewish, and the Germans were killing everybody that was Jewish. And I decided to enlist. And surprisingly enough, my mother and father never argued with me. Never argued. They knew I was going in. I probably could have stayed a little longer and be drafted. But I decided not to do that. And so my enlistment number, my number was 120144. I'm not saying it right.
Okay.
Okay.
And did being Jewish during the war change anything or be different from?
Say again?
Did being Jewish during the war, was that different for you?
I'm sorry.
How did being Jewish affect you during the war?
I don't understand your question.
How did being Jewish affect you during the war?
I still don't. I don't understand what you're asking me.
Oh,
Did being Jewish cause you to or did being Jewish influence you to do anything differently than if you weren't Jewish?
Well, I was bar mitzvahed in the Bronx, in a place up in Concourse. called the Concourse Center of Israel. I was 13 then. And of course, being Jewish, the things that were going on in Germany we were being affected by everybody. Everything was wrong with that. And yeah, you had to enlist. You had to do something. You just couldn't sit by and watch what Hitler was doing to the Jews in Germany. I mean, they were persecuting them, and the stories were out, and I guess I had to do it. Would I do it again? Under those circumstances, yes. Going into the army now, there's no way. I think Mr. Obama has made shit out of our country. He really does. At any rate, okay.
What type of training did you go through after you enlisted?
After what?
After you enlisted.
Well, I went through basic training at Fort McClellan, and then they had a program called ASTP, in which I enlisted with the Army ASTP, Army Special Training. And ASTP was what they were teaching us how to do certain things in the service.
How did you adapt from normal life to military life?
That wasn't easy. Being a soldier, you had so many people telling you what to do. But during my little time I spent at the Officer Candidate School, I met Jack Emberton, who was my TAC officer, who shaped my life to some degree. He was quite a guy. Quite a guy.
Where did you... Oh, sorry.
What?
Oh, where did you serve?
Serve? Army Engineers.
Where did you serve in?
Which location?
Well, first in Europe, and then that war was over. They put me through the Panama Canal, and I went to the Philippine Island. That was it. I served VE Day in Antwerp, Belgium, and VJ Day in Northern Luzon.
How did you feel about the destruction caused by the war?
How did I feel about what? I don't quite grab that question.
How was the death and all the loss of life affect you emotionally and personally?
I'm not sure how to answer that. I don't know.
Did you make any long-lasting friendships?
No. No, not I did. I had one funny incident which I'd like to tell you about. I call it my Kaplan story. On the boat going over to Europe in the poker game, I was the big winner. And I announced that I was going to have to get up early in the morning because I was going to be the mess captain, mess officer. And I was going to leave. And this Kaplan stuck a 45 in my face and said, "You can't leave, you can't quit. I'm the big winner, he was the big loser." And I did get away from him. And then in Europe one day, driving through Germany, on the road in Germany, I saw a guy waving down the road, and lo and behold, there was Kaplan. And I picked him up, drove him back to wherever he wanted to be, and then I didn't see him then. A couple of months later, when I went to the Philippines, I went down to Manila for a pass, and I walked into the Manila Officers Club, and there's Kaplan. He was in Manila at the time. And then we went out, we chatted, and then, of course, I then went home afterwards. concourse in the Bronx, and lo and behold, there's Kaplan. He lived on 191st Street. I lived on 183rd Street. Yeah. That's my Kaplan story.
How did you contact your loved ones at home?
Say again now?
How did you contact your loved ones at home?
My loved one. I didn't have a girlfriend then.
Or your family?
Oh, my mother and father was all I had.
Did you contact them at all?
Yeah, of course.
How did you contact them?
By letters, by postcards. My mother was very, how should I say it? It was very appreciative of my efforts in the Army. Yeah.
All right. What was a typical day like during service?
Oh boy. A lot of training, the basic training, which we marched, also I shot rifles. And by the way, if you answer the question, on Officer Candidate School, at the very end of the program, they had what was called a 40-hour program in which you had to do things and not sleep for 40 hours. And at that time, we built a bridge, we took a minefield out, etc. But that was typical of what we did at OCS. OCS was very severe training, a lot of physical work. As I said, I met Jack Emberton.
What was one thing during the war that would have made your life easier?
Nothing. I can't conceive of it. Making it easier? I don't know.
What major battles were you participating in?
The battle was Antwerp. The keeping Antwerp open for American ships to come in, American and British ships. That was a major thing. And the Germans were only 75 miles away. And I mean, that was close. If you think about 75 miles, like nothing. But we kept the Germans off. I carried sidearms, I carried a rifle, and I never used it to shoot at anybody, but it was there. Yeah, the Germans were close.
When did you complete your service?
April of, I think it was 1946 or 47. Good question, I gotta think about that. I think it was 46 I was out. They sent me home in 46, it was either 46 or 47. Yeah.
And how long were you in the service for?
44 months.
Okay.
44 months, yeah.
What was the day like when the war ended?
I was what now?
What was the day like when the war ended?
What day was I?
When the war ended, how was the day like? Was it really like amazing?
Well, the war ended when the Japanese surrendered in Bagabag. And my platoon and myself was right there. They surrendered right in front of me, right where we were. It was, the Americans put up the tallest German general they could find in the Philippines. I don't remember his name, but the Japanese officer that surrendered was probably about 5'2", and he came out of the hills when it was announced that the surrender was on, and with all his baggage, and all his soldiers were carrying his bags. That was quite a thing for us being right there. Right there. How close can you get? Like we're standing here.
How did you reunite with your family?
Well, I told you my mother and father had a fur store, had a store in the fur district. And when I got out of service and I took the train to Penn Station and walked to their store, and was because Penn Station was 34th Street, 34th? Yeah, I think it's 34th. And their store was on 29th Street. So I walked a few blocks. And then they, of course, my mother and father wanted me to go in the fur business. It was a dying business at the time. Even though I was a designer, it was not for us.
How did you reunite with your, how did you readjust to civilization?
I don't know if I ever did. I don't know. Did I ever just? Yeah, I did. I went into business. I invested my $4,000 with a plating shop in New York, in Los Angeles, and went into business with then my brother. My brother was, as I said, not a nice guy. What he did to your grandmother and myself is not a brotherly thing. He did the wrong thing.
What
Don't do
would,
that.
what would you like to say about the war today?
I think what we lost, what we won then and that's lost now is a result of somebody like Obama. I think we took a beautiful country and Obama's made shit out of it. Seriously. I can't stand him.
What is the most important life lesson you learned?
What's the most important one?
Life lesson.
I'm sorry, say it again.
What is the most important life lesson you learned?
I don't know how to answer that.
Just a lesson. What's the most lesson?
What's the most important lesson that you learned?
That's what?
What was the most important lesson you learned?
I'm sorry, Justin, I didn't quite understand.
What was the most important lesson that you learned?
I think being tough in life was what Jack Emberton imparted to me. And I'm sorry I didn't see him after I got out because he was in Chicago. I think learning how to accept some bad things that may have happened and be able to roll with the punches, so to speak. Yeah.
With your black platoon, how did it change the war? Or,
Say again, Justin.
how would you quote that?
Describe your platoon because it was a segregationist army at the time.
Oh, I had black troops. At that time, it was common. I think common. They don't do that anymore, but I had a good group. And we went to Europe together. We went to the Philippines together. It was a good group. And lo and behold, one day, going on United Airlines here in Los Angeles, I got a sky captain who greeted me. He was my sergeant in the army, and he was a baggage carrier. Yeah. I'm not sure how you adapt at this point, or what to say about it. But My days in the Army were okay. Would I do it again? Under the circumstances today, no. Under circumstances then, I think I would do it again. It's too much to ask to be a soldier in today's military. Too much. I think the guys that are doing it for money or whatever.
You're just asking that. Ask him that. Just do it.
Luke, just ask it.
Okay. How did your how did your engineering work?
Holy shit.
Say it again.
What type of engineering work did you do in the Army?
The only thing I did while I was in service was the drafting. I became a draftsman, which was good training for being an engineer, but I didn't proceed with it any length of time. And of course, when I got out of service, I went into the fur business. What's the matter? Oh.
How did you get this?
Why didn't you stay in the Army longer and gain higher ranks?
Why did I what?
Why didn't you stay in the Army and gain higher ranks?
Oh, no way. I wasn't going to stay in the Army. They told me that if I wanted to stick around, they'd make me a captain down the road. But it wasn't for me. Being an officer is fine while I was in service, but being an officer, no, wasn't for me. I just didn't want to do that. By the way, interesting, when Korea broke out in 1950, I was called into active duty. And they told me to go down to Governor's Island and take a physical, which I did. And the doctors there said, well, I need to examine you again. And they said they'd call me. They never did call me again for physical, and I never called them to find out why. Just didn't. I was kind of glad they didn't call me. And then I went to California afterwards, and I guess they didn't find me.
That's right.
Yeah.
Tell us the story.
That's a samurai sword.
Wait, hold it. No, we'll ask you a question about it.
And this little thing they got here is supposedly symbolic. I never really saw what it was. But this was a sword I took off one of the officers that surrendered. And the only thing I kept, I had a Japanese Nambu 14 pistol, and I had a German Luger, also a pistol. I brought them both home, and when I got back to the Bronx, I didn't want them in the house, and I gave them both weapons to the police. I surrendered the Nambu 14, I surrendered the Luger. It just wasn't for me. Keeping pistols in the house, no. At any rate, the only thing I kept was this sword, which is symbolic of an officer. Ah, I guess the size of it, sword. Hey, you want to take it apart then?
Here, Grandpa.
Yeah.
What medals did you earn while you were in the Army?
What?
What medals did you earn when you were in the Army?
Oh, it's in there. It's there. I got
Can you show us?
5 medals. Go ahead, pass it around. 5 medals and an oak leaf cluster.
Here, show it to the camera.
And I Don't ask me what. Yeah, that's symbolic of having being an officer in the Japanese service. Not a bayonet, it's a sword. Yeah. I'm kind of proud of these medals. By the way, interesting part of this. I never got a medal when I got out of the Army. They never gave me one, and I didn't care. And one day, many years ago, I saw an item in the paper, the Los Angeles Times, about a soldier, officer that had gotten his medals years later. And so I decided to write the War Department. I sent them a copy of my discharge papers and told them I never got a medal. And they wrote me back after a while saying, you don't write to the War Department. Here's who you write to. And again, I went through the whole procedure. I wrote to this other group. And lo and behold, they said to me, Raymond, patience. I will send you the medals. And lo, they did send them. They really sent me all these medals. And my dear wife and my daughter put this whole thing together.
Can you tell us what each medal is for?
You know something? You have to read it. I don't remember. I did something. Well, you gotta remember, I was in 2 theaters of war. Did I ever get shot at? I don't know if you call being buzz bombed being shot at. I guess you do. And then, of course, I went to the Philippines, and the war there was over, pretty much over, when Harry Truman dropped the first bomb on Hiroshima. When he dropped the second bomb on Nagasaki, it was really over. And so I didn't do anything there, other than I hauled out about 9,000 Japanese prisoners. By the way, it was interesting, hauling them out down to the prisoner of war camp. Some of them never made it out off my truck. They would jump off and kill themselves. That was kind of a Japanese, what do you call it, when they commit suicide, harikari. The Japanese did it because they felt it was incorrect to surrender. Yeah.
Are we done?
Justin, want to take this, please? Yeah.
Any last words?
Yeah.
Any,
Yeah, something.
where did you buy? Yeah, where did you buy? For the kids. For kids out there.
Do you have any words of advice for young people today?
Don't go in the Army. Don't go. You gotta stay away. Because Obama's just bad guy. Got a bad president. He's a bad president. Unfortunately, he's a bad president because he could have been good. I mean, he wasn't nowhere. There was no president, no Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, no way. He wasn't even, I don't know, just bad guy.
Just show all, what's his face?
No, don't go in the Army. Don't enlist. And don't even think about it. There are better things to do than to do that. I just,
How did your experiences in the war affect your day-to-day life?
that's a good question. Well, I think toughness in life was what I learned in the Army. I think you have to be tough just to live. Just to live, you have to be tough. You just can't accept just everything, anything. That's okay. Yeah. And I think I learned that from Jack Emberton. Uh, Jack Emberton. It's funny, I picked up the LA Times one time. I saw an ad in the paper on a real estate broker named Emberton. And I called him right away, and he knew of Jack Emberton, but he said he was in Chicago and that he had died. And that was the only last thing I remember about Jack Emberton. By the way, he was quite a guy. The story that went out was he parachuted in North Africa and landed with a broken ankle and had to march 50 miles with a full field pack with a broken ankle. He was a tough guy. And he told everybody his story about it. He was just a tough guy. He was a man. He's a man among men. Huh. Yeah.
Just who was the most influential person you met in the war?
Say again, Justin.
Who was the most influential person you met in the war?
Jack Emberton was. He was. His legacy, so to speak, remained with me for quite a while. Yeah.
Here. What is a TAC officer?
What?
What's a TAC officer?
A TAC officer is a tactical officer. We call him a TAC officer. It's the guy who trains you going through officer candidate school. That's TAC officer. Yeah. He wouldn't accept excuses. We never had excuses for him. And when we graduated as a second lieutenant, he was there saying goodbye to us. And he knew we were going overseas right away. We did. We did. And surprisingly, they first sent me to Washington, the state of Washington, and I picked up my OEM outfit, OPM, and then they put me on a train back to Camp Shanks in New York to go to Europe. Why they did it that way, I don't know, but I wasn't going to debate it. Yeah.
Well, Grandpa, I think that wraps it up.
Okay.
And
Are you all set?
yeah, I think we are.
Thank you.
Grandpa, we'd like to thank you for
Oh,
telling us your story.
What that, Justin?
Thank you for telling us your story.
Oh.
We all appreciate what
Okay.
you did for us today and what you did for us back
Okay.
then.
I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you heard it. I'm going to be 90 years old. Not sure how many people live to be 90, but I'm around. And I'm in fairly good shape. Fair. I don't walk as much as or as fast as I used to, but I do walk. I walk up down this hill.
Right.
and we're gonna take a picture.